and Max Harper will lead us in the invocation. So Mr. Allen, if you could come and lead us in the pledge, please.
Well, thank you for the honor. Would you all please join me in honoring our great nation with the Pledge of Allegiance? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Mr. Max Harper, if you could lead us in our invocation, please.
Take a few moments, stand back here. You all can ask for prayer. Heavenly Father, help us to remember that we are here to serve, not to be served. Remind us daily of the many who need to be helped. Guide us to be there for others, assist them in times of need, and now bless this food to our use and us to your service. Amen.
And everybody can be seated. Look on your table for a list of upcoming meetings at the Columbia Club. Thanks to our program chair, Trina. Now, Max, did I hear that you're going to be taking over as program chair?
I did. Trina just said to do everything that she did. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And thanks for Graham Honecker for some of his connections going into the fall program. Just a reminder, past President's Day is September 30th. If there are any past presidents you haven't seen in a while, please give them a call to remind them that we're back at the Columbia Club Thursdays at noon. The new Kiwanis year officially begins October 1st, hallelujah, with induction of new officers on October 7th. I'm excited to welcome Miss Laura Holloway. Thank you very much. Max Harper and Jackie Clancy's back to the club board. All pass the gavel to incoming president Carol Orbison and take the lead as foundation chair. Again, Laura and Max, thank you very much for coming on board. You will be receiving your dues renewal invoice this week. You have the option to prepay for the year, which will be much appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Alan Schaff, our new member, as well as our longtime members like Steve Kessinger. This marks his 24th year of membership. If you'd like to join Nancy Ulrichs, Laura Berry, and Trina Raudebush on the external grant committee to review applications for our community grants, please let Nancy know or Miss Kelly know. It is one of the most hands-on part of serving the club, where we're doling out about $40,000 of $2,500 allotments to nonprofits around the city. Club board meeting is Tuesday morning. If you haven't secured funding for your committee's activities with the internal grant application, contact Ms. Kelly at the Kiwanis office ASAP. It's good to see Mr. Leonard Hoops here today, CEO with Visit Indy. Mr. Art Kodroff is going to introduce today's speaker.
Thanks. It's my pleasure to introduce today's special guest of the downtown Kiwanis Club of Indianapolis, Mr. Leonard Hoops. Leonard is the president and CEO of Visit Indy, which is the official destination sales and marketing organization for Indianapolis, a position he has held since 2011. As the Visit Indy CEO, Leonard leads a team of 52 industry professionals who are charged with growing Central Indiana's $5.6 billion convention tourism and event industry. Under Leonard's leadership, Visit Indy has set all-time records for convention and tourism sales, delivering up to $1 billion in incremental economic impact and a 90-to-1 return on investment from public funding. During his tenure, Indianapolis has been named the #1 convention city in America by USA Today and a top visitor destination by the New York Times, Condé Nast Traveler, Travel and Leisure, and Time magazine. Prior to joining Visit Indy, Leonard was the executive VP and chief customer officer of San Francisco Travel for 5 years, where his teams produced all-time convention sales records and managed international tourism development offices in 13 countries. In Leonard's 30 years of corporate and destination marketing experience, he has also served as senior VP and chief marketing officer of the Sacramento Convention and Visitors Bureau, senior VP of marketing for the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau, and managed corporate communications for a global division of Fortune 120 company. Leonard's been named an Indiana legend by the Indiana Historical Society, one of the 25 most influential people in the meetings industry by Successful Meetings magazine, one of the top 25 most extraordinary minds in hospitality and travel and sales and marketing by HSMI, received the Delta Upsilon Fraternity's Sloan Kettering Award for Business, and received the Kurt Vonnegut Humor Award from the Kurt Vonnegut Museum and Library. Leonard earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from San Jose State University and an MBA from Santa Clara University. He currently serves on the Professional Convention Management Association Executive Committee, the Destinations International Foundation Bureau of Trustees, U.S. Travel Association, the Capital Improvement Board of Managers, which is near and dear to my heart, and the boards of Indy Chamber, Downtown Indy, Indiana Sports Corporation, and Conner Prairie Museum. He's also a governor's appointee to the Indiana Protection Advocacy Services Commission. He and his wife Doreen live in downtown with their son Cannon, 16, and daughter Avalon, 9. Please join me in giving a warm Kiwanian welcome to the
Well, given that lengthy introduction, my presentation's been concluded. That was kind of you, Art, to roll off the whole thing that Michelle sent over, so my mother would have appreciated it. So it's always great to be with Kiwanians. The organization is near and dear to our heart. We obviously, it's headquartered here in Indianapolis. We work a lot with International on, we'll have next year's International here in Indianapolis, replacing Manila. I was chatting with some folks in the food line earlier that's probably the first time Indy has ever replaced Manila for a convention, and so these are unusual times. These are very unusual times, without a question. If you've been near the convention center today, Gen Con opened today, so if you haven't seen those folks, I like to tell folks not to worry about Gen Con because they were masking before it was popular. So let's talk about Indy tourism, past, present, and future. Just updated this presentation this week because it hasn't been rolled out for a while, but it's got some new pandemic info. But let's start with the fact that Indianapolis right now is the #1 ranked convention city in America according to USA Today. That's a survey they did back in 2014. They have never updated it since then. We hope they never do. We're guaranteed to stay on top as long as they just leave that alone. But it was a big surprise when USA Today did that. And Las Vegas, San Francisco, Orlando, you name it. It wasn't about who was biggest, it was about who was best. And Indianapolis, as we see it today, is a destination that has been very intentionally developed over the last 50 years to operate the way it operates. So how did we even get on the map as a convention and visitor destination? Well, it starts back with the Indy 500 in 1911, right? So we had this big old 2.5-mile oval out in the fields, not much else around it, but that started to draw the attention of a lot of people that there was this 500-mile race. We built up around the automobile industry in the early days, manufacturing, other things like that, but that obviously was the thing that really gave us some global and national recognition. Our organization actually is nearly 100 years old. We're 2 years short of our 100th anniversary at Visit Indy. So in 1923, we were founded as the Indianapolis Convention and Publicity Committee for the city. And for 1 year, we were a subcommittee for the Chamber of Commerce before going off into our own. So it's nearly a century-old organization. Interestingly enough, if you look at the 1925 in the middle, if you can read that, back in 1925, this is from a history book of our industry, Indy was one of the top 5 cities in America for conventions and the early delegates. People are like, what in the world? How is that possible? It was New York and Chicago and Indy and Philadelphia and Kansas City. Any idea why that might have been in the mid-20s that we would be a top 5 city? Boom, winner, chicken dinner. We were a railroad hub, back before airports, the O'Hares and the Hartsfield and the DFWs. Indy was a hub. If you wanted to get from California to a meeting, you wanted to get from Florida to a meeting, you probably were gonna have to come to a city like Indy or Chicago or Kansas City because we were the hubs. Unfortunately, we missed the boat when it came to the airport hubs. And so as we got into the 50s and 60s, this was a classic downtown image. Some of you may remember those days. I hear from stories all the time of people who've been here for 60 years. Bob Reynolds, who's on a board member emeritus at Visit Indy from Barnes and Thornburg, will tell me about the days that they would be shooting pigeons on the streets of Indianapolis at 5:30 on a Thursday night. So we got off the map.
Are you bringing that back?
But we thought about it during the pandemic. This would be something people to do. So Mayor Lugar, before he was a senator back in the late 60s, decided we needed to be more than what we were by the time he took office. And so in 1965, same year I was born, the Capital Improvement Board that Art was mentioning was formed in 1965 to be this municipal corporation to help lead us out of the stale period that we were in Indianapolis. And 7 years later, the first major project under the CIB was the opening of the Indiana Convention Center. And so the piece that you see down near Victory Field is the part that opened up back in '72. Then we said, you know what, let's be really good at sports. Let's be good at conventions and sports. That's what is going to differentiate us. And so Market Square Arena was built. I think that was 1974. 1981 or 2 was the Hoosier Dome, which became the RCA Dome with no football team. And then we recruited in the darkness of night the Baltimore Colts to move here. The Pan Am Games of 1987, that's also the same year that the NFL Combine came the first time. It's been here every year since 1987. It's probably going to go away, unfortunately. It's been in the news, but the NFL has been getting a lot of pressure. Commissioner Goodell from Jerry Jones and the Las Vegas team and the LA folks with their new stadiums to move the Combine around the way they do the draft and other things. And so that will likely happen beginning in 2023. We have it for one more year for sure. The NCAA, we recruited them in '97, they opened up in '99, and then we started hosting lots of Final Fours. Of course, we hosted the entire NCAA tournament this year. Anchor's Life in '99, Lucas Oil in '08, and then 2012, the Super Bowl. So you can see this has been a very consistent, dedicated strategy that we have followed and not wavered from for 50 years now. We also had an infrastructure strategy. We said, this is a bit of a commodity business, and by that I mean we sell a bunch of boxes. You fly into an airport box, and you get into an Uber box, and you check into your hotel box, and you meet in your convention center box, and you eat in your restaurant box, and here we are in this box, and a box inside of a box at the Columbia Club. But we needed to have the best boxes. Our airport, this actually should be updated through 2020, but it's been the #1 ranked airport, according to Airports Council International, Condé Nast, a number of different publications have ranked it the #1 airport. And again, this is not about being the biggest, we don't have the most flights, it's about the best customer experience, and that's what Indy consistently delivers. The convention center was expanded in 2011, that's when we added the JW Marriott, 1,005 rooms there. And now this is our real calling card to being the #1 convention city in America. We've got 12 different hotels, you may not realize it's that many, that are connected by indoor skywalks to get to the convention center. So for example, Le Meridien, which is over there across, right next door to San Elmo, you're like, how do you get from there connected? There's a upstairs room that goes into the mall, and from the mall you can come into the convention center. So it can be -10 degrees or storming, and you can get from Le Meridien or Omni or these other properties, the obvious ones like JW and Westin and Marriott you know about, but there's some other ones you can get through via the mall to get into the convention center. And then of course the stadium and the convention center are connected. So for the bigger groups that we have, the fire department instructors, etc., we can actually expand into the playing field for Lucas Oil as a convention center space, and a number of shows we have do that. So how did we actually do with this 2011 expansion? Well, if you look going back to 2005 to 07, the last 3 years before we actually got to sell the expansion. So we had already announced it, but we weren't able to contract it those years. We were averaging about 500,000, just under 500,000 room nights a year. So when a group like Kiwanis books us, Laura will say, sign these hotel contracts, or the hotels will say, sign my contracts. And she will do that, and we'll add up the room nights from those hotel contracts, and whether that group is meeting a year from now or 10 years from now, that all goes into the number that we count. So that average for future years, prior to the ability to sell the expansion, was about 500,000. That jumped up to nearly 675,000 as soon as we could sell that expansion. So a big increase. And PwC did an analysis for us in the early 2000s to say, hey, what would be an acceptable return on investment if you did this? And they thought it would be somewhere around 650,000 room nights a year, would equate to an ROI with the spending that comes with that to make up for the investment the city had to put into it. So right off the bat, even before the building opened, we were 675, we were beating the PwC numbers. That's actually pretty unusual. More often than not, I see expansion estimates that overestimate their impact, not underestimate their impact. So right off the bat, we were past it. Then as soon as we actually opened the doors, we jumped another 60,000 room nights a year, 735,000 room nights a year. Because there were some people who weren't gonna be early adopters, they didn't wanna look at the blueprint, they wanted to walk in the building, look at the carpet, check out the rooms, and that gave us the next lift. 2014 is when we got named #1 convention city and became our calling card on our sales visits to Chicago and DC, etc. Boom, you see a huge increase from that. That absolutely made a difference when somebody said an outside independent entity like USA Today says you're the best. That got a lot of people who weren't willing to look, and once they looked, they booked. Indy is a look-to-book city. When I was working in San Francisco, I could sell, San Francisco without anybody even showing up. Here's the hotel contract, just mail it to them, they'll sign it, whatever. I could have people show up and have panhandlers be far more aggressive than you'll ever see in Indianapolis and still get that deal booked. I mean, that's just the difference between a brand like San Francisco that people know and a brand like Indy where people have to see it to look to book. So that consistently, 880,000, peaked at 904, 840. We were just consistently, again, PwC said a good ROI would be 650,000 room nights, and we were pushing 900,000 for all these years. To compare that into hard data of dollars spent and things like that, 05, when that chart started, through 19, which is the last year we had available of data, we went from 22 million visitors or so to over 30 million. The state and local taxes is a big number, more than doubled in that time frame. So there again, this is where your ROI comes in and goes, wow, we got another $450 million. A lot of that goes through to the CIB. So a lot of people don't realize this. They'll talk about, all our tax dollars for Bankers Life and Lucas Oil and these sorts of things. We had an analysis done maybe 8 years ago, and more or less every two out of every $3 that goes to pay for these facilities, to operate them, for the debt service, is being paid for by a visitor. So we as the locals are paying a third of that, and our third is primarily through the food and beverage tax, or your ticket admission tax if you're going to a Colts game and things like that. But the visitors are paying for the hotel taxes, the other part of the food and beverage, the car rental, a lot of the ticket admission taxes, etc. So we have all these great facilities in Indy under our model that we're paying 33 cents on the dollar to have as residents. So it's a real great benefit for us as people who live here. And of course, the jobs part. This is all pre-pandemic, obviously. The numbers dropped dramatically during the pandemic, but they're starting to come back up now again. Then, of course, we hit 2020, the pandemic. We fared actually better than most. Downtowns have absolutely been destroyed during the pandemic, not just because of the lack of conventions and tourism and things like that, but the fact that businesses all went to virtual. Many of you in this room, right? If not all of you, have basically been working virtually for much of the past year. And I think Sherry Syward from downtown Indy told me we had 140,000 people working downtown, and that at the absolute, last June, April, May, June timeframe, we were at about 25,000 people who were working downtown. And so that's a pretty big drop. You can't just replace 125,000 people or so who just disappeared, which is why all these restaurants you see that are still not reopened and haven't been replaced went out of business or had to move or had some other business model. They just couldn't survive. As much as the convention and tourism business was impacting downtown, it was the icing on the cake. The cake was the downtown workforce. And that cake will never be back to the same. It'll be a 3-layer, not a 5-layer coming back. Sherry's, their estimates, his best case scenario based on all the kind of the global surveys of the corporate world is maybe 100,000 back downtown. Because so many businesses have permanently gone to sales forces, right next door. They're still not back. You have the option of working, but there may be 20% of their workforce comes into the office, so 80% are no longer here, of our biggest employer along with Lilly, supporting the restaurants and the other things that are happening downtown. That's your biggest impact downtown, more than anything else or anything else you may have heard, is just that lack of constant energy from Monday through Friday from the workforce. But overall, we've actually done better than most downtown because of the fact that we've been able to do events since last July. So we worked with Dr. Kane, with Dr. Box, and we said, give us a chance to prove to you we can hold these events safely. You're going to Target, you're going to Kroger. I guarantee you we can have events in the convention center with mask mandates and other protocols that will be safer than going to Target. And they said, okay, we're going to give you one chance. You screwed up, you're done. If you do that well, you get a second chance. So, well, we've had chance after chance since last July that ultimately led to being able to do proof of concept for the NCAA and then host the entire NCAA tournament, which was a very interesting process for me because Arts boss Andy Mallon and I, back in November, were under NDAs, and we couldn't even tell our own staffs for nearly a month of negotiating with the NCAA on this tournament, even before frankly, even before the mayor and the governor were engaged, because they didn't want to engage them unless we could figure out how to pull this off. And we had to move groups because we had been having events that were contracted in the convention center who didn't want to move, and who knew their leverage all of a sudden. They didn't know what we were trying to move them for, but they could figure it out. They're like, oh, March, April? Yeah, I think I know what you're looking for. Well, how about write us a check? No. So that was about 3 weeks of rocking the fetal position for both me and Andy, but we got ultimately, obviously we had to turn the deal got done, and right now we've been having a pretty good June and July. August and September have been very impacted by the Delta variant. We've had groups in June and July, we're picking up about 65 to 70% of the pre-pandemic numbers. In September, and now the forecast for October, they're picking up anywhere from 10 to 40% of their numbers. Gen Con, as big as it is, it'll be 30,000 people this week. That's 40% of their typical number. They're normally 70,000. I'm thrilled because 30,000 is still the most we've ever had, or since the pandemic began as far as convention business goes. But it's still 40% of what they would normally do. We had a show called CEDIA, which is the Custom Electronic Design and Installation Association, home theater people, that was here about 2 weeks ago, and they were less than 15%. And it all really boils down right now, it goes back to this corporate mentality. The corporate situation right now is they're the most volatile. So they're the ones not sending people back to work. They're the ones saying, well, don't go to that trade show in Indianapolis. We're not going to allow you to do that. Or if we do, we're pulling it back from a 40 by 40 booth to a 10 by 10, and 10 people instead of going, or 2 people are going to go. And we're seeing that really pick up on the corporate shows. Whereas Gen Con's really not that much corporate. There's some mom and pops and some bigger game companies that are a little more corporate, but even the corporate in Gen Con isn't very corporate. So they're holding up a little bit better. One of the reasons we remain bullish on our future is that this is something I got asked about maybe 8 months ago in a conference that I was doing online. They said, why do you think this business? I was on a panel where a couple of people was like, face-to-face is done. I'm like, you're crazy. It's very myopic. We're thinking very short, time forward. Human nature is such that here we are, right? We're all here gathering for lunch. At some point, the pandemic becomes endemic, and you just deal with it the way you deal with seasonal flu and things, and you hope that you get through it to that point. That we've all taken the necessary precautions and done the things we need to do. But I came up with what I call the 4 C's of face-to-face events: content, connection, commerce, and competition. Video only does one halfway decent, and that is content. So if somebody wants to sit online and watch what I'm saying, they can hear what I'm saying. They're not going to interact the way we've had side conversations at the table, where you get to know each other a little bit better. Maybe some business cards get passed around. The chat box is no substitute for connection. So the connection part is what really people are super excited when they, I've been on 22 planes in 9 cities the past 3 months, and it's amazing to see the connection come together when you see somebody for the first time in 18 months or 2 years, because you've only seen them on Zoom. And I've been in places that still have mask mandates. LA, when I was there, had a mask mandate. DC, and it's kind of funny how that works, because like if you're 100 feet from a glass of water, you're like, oh, the mask is coming off. I'm near water, it's over there. I'm drinking that glass. So it's people have their own levels of comfort if they're vaccinated or not or whatever. I've been since March, and I will swear by the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, because I know I've been exposed probably 1,000 times in that time frame on 22 planes. I was at an NBA Finals game in Phoenix when I was at the conference speaking there with 22,000 people who didn't have masks screaming at the top of their lungs in a finals game, and I'm like, I'm bathing in it right now. If I'm fine next week, it's working. So commerce is the trade show part. Trade shows just weren't getting done with any effectiveness during the pandemic. Fire Department Instructors Conference, which we have in Indy, just had it in early August, perfect example. There are literally people writing checks for 8 figures at the FDIC show. You may not realize that. You think, oh, it's firefighters and they're in their outfits of training, but there are purchasers who are buying trucks and equipment and safety, oxygen tanks and all sorts of things that will spend $10, $20 million. They are not going to do that on Amazon. They're not going to do that on Zoom. They have to talk to their customer rep. They want to know more about the company. They want to literally kick the tires of the truck. And so commerce has not been facilitated particularly well. And so that's another key factor as to why this won't go away. And then competition, that didn't go away. This is what kept us alive. AAU basketball and volleyball and gymnastics and NCAA. That never stopped. People wanted to compete. People, with their kids, wanted to see their kids play and get ready for college sports and things of that nature. So 3 of the 4 C's can't be replicated online with any effectiveness. Only one can be. And so while Zoom is going to be here to stay, and all the various other iterations of Zoom. It is not a replacement, it is a supplement. It's a temporary replacement because of the situation we're in, but it's not a permanent replacement. So what's next for us? Well, we're still a sports city, right? So we did have the one big change of the NBA All-Star Game got moved to 24, which is fine. That's cool. We have something to still look forward to down the line. One thing that's not up on air for 24 is we have a verbal definite, it's not a big public thing right now, from the USA Olympic Committee for Swimming, that we're going to have the U.S. Olympic Swimming Trials in 2024 here in Indy, which will be really cool because it was here in 1924, believe it or not, at Broad Ripple Park. And the 1924 Olympic Games that they qualified for was in Paris. The 2024 Games that they'll qualify for will be in Paris. So that's kind of a cool, that was one of our pitches, is like a century later, do the same thing. We've got, of course, the College Football Playoff Championship game coming in January. That's pretty exciting. And the CFP is actually housed in the Visit Indy office. They're a separate entity from the Sports Corporation. So we had more space than Sports Corp had to offer. So they're actually housed with us right now and getting ready for that big event. Pop quiz, what city is this? Any ideas?
Chicago?
Distinguishing characteristic.
Oh, Seattle.
Now a distinguishing characteristic. I heard that. I don't see any distinguishing characteristic. Well, there's one. How about this city?
Awesome.
Detroit?
St. Louis.
Distinguishing characteristic, iconic structure. How about this one? Good job. A little more easier to see Paris now, right? Right, but think about this. This is Paris without the Eiffel Tower. It's a flat city with a river that runs through it. Sound familiar? So is Indianapolis. No oceans, no mountains. That's no excuse. I hear it all the time. Oh, we don't have oceans and mountains. Well, neither does Paris. They got a big old tower. That was the tallest building in the world when it was constructed, which surpassed the Washington Monument, which was the tallest structure in the world when it was constructed. This was built for a World's Fair to prove the strength of steel and things of that nature, and the Parisians hated it. And here it is, 130 years later, still there, and arguably the most iconic structure in the world. So we have something called the Indy Destination Vision, and this is a complicated wheel that you don't have to look at in great detail. But back in 2014, we started this project because we are too group dependent, and we never had that more proven than during the pandemic. So this data this chart shows you that this is like 2019 data. So this is your dependency on group business. Indianapolis at the very top, 35% of our 75% of downtown occupancy prior to the pandemic was from group business. Nobody depended on the Gen Cons of the world more than Indy. When Visit Indy had sneezed, the rest of the city had a cold. Because if nothing was in the building, you were running 45 or 50% occupancy downtown, which is kind of what we're doing now, because there's no corporate business, no business transient. Interestingly enough, San Diego's number 2 on that. There's all these big hotels along the waterfront where their convention center is that are highly dependent on group business, even beyond the leisure, because they're just too big for just filling up with leisure. But it goes to show you that if we didn't figure out some way to diversify our business, and the pandemic again really made that super clear, then we were going to struggle when group business wasn't in town. We've seen that for the last year and a half, even with the relative success we've had, given all the sports and things that we've been able to bring in. So we formed this destination vision. It's now iteration 2.2. It started under Mayor Ballard. That was 1.0. I think it got changed once under him, 1.1. Mayor Hogsett, they never wanted the previous mayor's plan, so he was 2.0. He's changed it twice, so it's up to 2.2. But what do we need to do to make Indy a must-visit destination? Paris is Paris not because of oceans and mountains. It's because they made it a place that people wanted to visit. They did placemaking, they did culture building. They got a 2,000-year head start on us. I'm going to give them that. A lot of time to perfect the croissant, collect some art, build a structure. But that's all they have on us is time, right? They're actually farther north, and I've been in Paris a couple of times. Some of you, I'm sure, have been as well. It snows in the winter, it floods in the spring, it can be humid as heck in the summer. It is very similar, actually, to Indianapolis's climate. And yet it is the city everybody wants to go to. And it was super fun when we had our Delta flight. Hopefully we'll be able to get that back, but we lost that from the pandemic as well, that nonstop to Paris. We were the first city to actually create a position called the VP of Destination Development. So we have a guy named Matt Carter who all he does is work with developers in the city and others to constantly try to do new things for Indianapolis. When we've since hired a guy named Brad Bobian, who was part of the DMD department, Metropolitan Development Department for the city, because we wanted a real city planner on our staff. So we have our own little mini DMD going at Visit Indy to try to be a catalyst to get these projects forward, help developers, help the city, etc. There's 3 core strategies, and I'll go back to show you what those are. That's the cultivate and connect our places, the celebrate our story, and the steward and sustain our impact. And then a bunch of sub-strategies. There are 67 initiatives. But an initiative, for example, that was in there, if you've ever been on the circle when they do the Shining a Light initiative, that is an example of something that came out of the Destination Vision. When the Eli Lilly, when the Lilly Endowment came out and said, hey, we're going to do a cultural arts grant, Sherry Seibert called me and said, let's do that video thing you guys were talking about. We said, okay, let's. So they had to bid on it because they were going to be the operator. We were the supporting bidder, and that was one of the things that got funded. And now, we had a 9/11 memorial tribute. If you saw that recently, we've had an Indy 500 special video that goes up during that time of the year. When the CFP happens, we'll have something for them. So it's a really fun, thing. It's just one piece, but you start putting these things piece by piece by piece, and all of a sudden you have a city that people are like, hey, that's pretty cool. Another example is this White River Vision Plan. So we had been saying, hey, so they've got the River Thames, or the River Seine, and we've got the River White. So let's do something with the River White. And we pushed Hogshead's office, Mayor Hogshead's office, to take a look at this, and then they said yes. And then we got Brenda Myers, who runs Hamilton County's Convention and Tourism Agency, and who's on the Capital Improvement Board, to say yes. And then we all of a sudden had Hamilton County's elected leaders saying yes. And now, like these ready grants that Governor Holcomb has put out, they're collectively, both counties are going after a bunch of money to develop the White River. There's been this stormwater project and the big dig that's been going on for years to make the water better, because it's basically been used as a dumping ground for decades, for a century, over a century. And so the water clarity is getting much better. But the idea here is we want to knit together a 58-mile, even if it's not called this, national park-like entity. Southern Marion County to northern Hamilton County, 58 miles of green, and leaving certain areas completely undeveloped, because you want to have, the egrets and the frogs, and you want to have places that for the natural wildlife, and you also want to have areas where people can go and do entertaining things and enjoy their visit to Indianapolis and central Indiana. And so right now this is a big project, and this White River Vision was commissioned between the 2 counties, and it's underway right now. We're working on all sorts of different concepts that will be in each of what they call a reach. There's 6 different reaches that everything comes from Conner Prairie down to the southern part of Marion County you probably never even seen before along the river. So again, the idea there is, there's Yellowstone and Badlands and Yosemite. Well, what about White River National Park? And then phase 6 of the convention center. So phase 5 was that deal that we did where the RCA Dome used to be, that is now the expanded part of the center in the JW. Phase 6 is going to be an 800-room Signia Hilton Hotel, which is their version of a JW Marriott, a brand new brand for Hilton, and then another 50,000 square foot ballroom that will be on Pan Am Plaza. You get a better sense of it. It's the part with the little green thing. The concept right there would be like a green roof on top of a ballroom with the big tower hotel next to it. And so, again, we've done analysis, and we think this can take us up from, when we get back to post-pandemic kind of normalcy of 2019, take us from maybe the 850,000 rooms a year to over 1 million rooms a year, because we believe in the 4 Cs. We know people want to get together again. Our brand is already elevated within our industry just because we've been doing stuff since last July, and a lot of people haven't. We've had Chicago has not had a lot of events. Columbus, Ohio. There's a lot of stuff in the Midwest that basically got shut down, and we used the Kroger Target argument with Drs. Box and Kate, and didn't screw it up. So that, I believe, is my presentation. So thank you very much. Happy to answer any questions. Yes?
Have you looked at the redevelopment of the river in Columbus, Ohio? I think they've done a really nice job.
Yep. I did, in fact, I went to the ASAE show in Columbus a couple years ago and toured their river. Really nice job. It's really pretty, but it's really, at least when I was there, was not all that well activated. And so trying to figure out that beautification with activation is a key thing. It looked like it was very well used by the jog, almost like the way our canal walk is downtown, right? It's So some people don't think our canal is activated enough like, say, San Antonio's canal is. But it's very well received by the local residents who want to go jogging there in the morning. But Columbus is a good example. You had a question?
Are the other cities taking Indianapolis more seriously as a competitor now because of your success?
Well, and going back to the 2014, they hate the whole USA Today thing. Because it's every trade show, it's a giant banner in our booth and this and that, and you have that Orlando guy come over and roll his eyes out. It's like, really, you know, it is what it is, buddy. We are surprisingly competitive against Orlando and Chicago and New Orleans, and really the city that I aspire to right now, that I'm envious of, because when I got in this industry nearly 30 years ago, Nashville and Austin were both sleepy towns. Nashville, you went to the Gaylord Opryland, you never went downtown to the convention center because it was a dump. And Austin was just a college town. And they are the best examples, in my opinion, of over a 30-year period of truly developing their product. In both of their cases, they focused on music. Austin is the live music capital of the world, and Nashville is Music City, USA. That's their taglines, and people love music, and so that's not our niche. We have music, but we're not going to be a third music destination. We've got to figure out other things. We've got to have better boxes. We've got to figure out other ways to develop our product, our wide river, that sort of thing. But they've done pretty well even during the pandemic. We've done the best of any Midwest city north of Nashville when it comes to hotel occupancy during the pandemic. We've absolutely killed Minneapolis and Columbus and St. Louis, and well, St. Louis may be south there. So there's the one exception south. But and then who else? Yeah, Chicago just was decimated. I mean, Chicago's been running 15-20% occupancies downtown. It's been terrible. So, but yeah, there's definitely some folks who and it's funny because Columbus, using their example, I was just at an event in DC about 3 weeks ago, and one of the sales gals for Columbus came up to me and said, we're basically Indianapolis 10 years behind you every time. So like, no matter what we do, you've done something else and we're still 10 years behind you. Except for the riverfront, they're ahead of us there. Yes?
For you personally, has there been an event that's just in the back of your head, like, this will be a crown jewel for me to bring to Indianapolis?
So we've got a couple down the road. We, in 2019, booked 2 big groups that I was really excited about that we had tried to get for many years and failed. And it would be more meaningful to me than you probably, but one of them was the American Dental Association convention. So they were my customer in San Francisco, and they'd come every 4 or 5 years in San Francisco, and they would rotate between Orlando and Vegas and San Francisco. And so there's a guy named Jim Goodman, who's one of the senior executives. I called Jim when I got here in 2011. Hey Jim, I'm in Indianapolis now. We have a great convention center. It's actually bigger than Moscone in San Francisco. Leonard, don't call us, we'll call you. You know, Indy is no San Francisco. Okay. Well, when we announced that Hilton Signia in phase 6, I got a call from Jim Goodman. And they're big Hilton partners, and he goes, this is really interesting. This looks really cool. And we brought him in the meantime. We've been softening him up, bringing him to an NCAA tournament, bringing him to a Super Bowl, these sorts of things, right? So he sees it and drives down from Chicago, and he starts getting in his head that maybe my customers will like this. So that was one that was a really big win. And another one is the American Society of Association Executives, so ASAE. ASAE is not a huge convention in itself the way Gen Con is, where you get 70,000 people. It might be 8 or 10,000. Somewhere in that ballpark, but it's 8 or 10,000 people who run associations. And so if they come in and they go, if I can get even 10% of them, if I can get 800 brand new people to go, whoa, this place is pretty cool, I can have my big annual convention here, then I've got 800 big, strong prospects as a result of hosting that one convention beyond what they spent in that one. So for me, those are really big because they have that benefit. I'm obviously very excited about NBA All-Star. We'd love to get another Super Bowl back. That's another, don't call us, we'll call you. We've had those discussions, Ryan Vaughn and I, with the NFL, and we know them well, but it's, that's an owner-driven league. And the next time we have a Super Bowl will probably be because we spent $500 million updating Lucas Oil. I mean, it usually is a catalyst like that will get the other owners to say, okay, well, Jim, or to say, we'll give you, probably Carly at that point, we'll give you a game because you spent $500 million of public money. Yay, have a Super Bowl. So, yeah.
How do you market Indianapolis, Indiana to individuals?
Yeah, there is a difference between the convention and the leisure side. Right now we're very much, there's 2 kinds of marketing that happens on the leisure side. There is event-driven marketing. So we have the Indy 500, and with an Indy 500 or something like that, we're global, right? We can get anywhere from around the globe, if they're into racing, to come. An NCAA tournament, a Super Bowl, those sorts of things. So if it's a big event, we're global or national in marketing. If it's general leisure, we're very family and regional oriented. So we'll focus on our neighboring states, and maybe occasionally some flight markets if it's a nonstop flight market, to get folks, and very much about world's largest children's museum, top 10 zoo, White River State Park, and the various attractions we have there. We average about 2.1 nights on the leisure side, so it's not nearly as long as a convention. Gen Con's a 4-day convention, you get 4 or 5 nights out of a Gen Con. If you have a big NCAA tournament, you might get 3 or 4 or 5 nights out of an NCAA tournament. The typical leisure travel, that's actually up. When I got here, it was 1.6. Our most recent data, even in the pandemic, is 2.1. So we've added a half a room night per, and you multiply that over, tens of thousands of additional visitors. You saw those numbers have gone up to 30 million, from 23 million to 30 million. That's 7 million more visitors. If they're staying an extra half night, is adding to those numbers too. But it's very family and regional on the leisure side, and we still are missing that what I would call a 7-day-a-week, 12-month-a-year attraction. We do extremely well Tuesday night through Saturday nights in Indianapolis. Sunday night and Monday night is the difference between a San Francisco and a Vegas and an Orlando with an Indianapolis. They fill Sunday, Monday. We don't. Sunday is typically pre-pandemic 45-50% occupancy downtown, and Monday is maybe 60-65 because it's much more business transient dependent and less, because we just don't have that Disneyland or something to say somebody coming on that Sunday or Monday night.
So if all summer I have to listen to George Clooney advertise pure Michigan, Michigan. Does Indianapolis, do we have some celebrity marketing us outside of the state?
So, well, interestingly, the state of Indiana has very much not spent very much money on tourism, the state. So Indianapolis spends way more than the rest of the state combined on tourism. And under Governor Daniels, I think they were maybe $2 million a year. Under Governor Pence, it was maybe $3 million a year. They might be a little bit more up under Governor Holcomb. He believes in it a little bit more than they did. And they might be up to $4 million a year now or something like that, but it's still paltry. I mean, Pure Michigan, I think, is a $60 or $70 million campaign, and we're like 4.
Adam Driver, the guy who plays Darth Vader.
Yeah. So I mean, and we've got people, right? We've got David Letterman, and we've got people that could, Mario Andretti.
Axl Rose, probably.
Axl Rose from Lafayette. Yeah, he was just here. He was just here. Yeah. I want Axl to do a commercial where he comes on and goes, "Where do we go? Where do we go?" Indianapolis, that's where we're going. That was a quick line from Sweet Child of Mine. Yes.
We were all so proud of all that you did during the final, the NCAA tournament. It was just so much fun to talk to everybody we knew around the country and be so proud of what we did. But if you have a wish list, and maybe you just indicated having advertising, but what would be at the top of your wish list that we might do in order to make your job easier?
This doesn't resonate with a lot of people, but I do believe in the iconic structure. And even though we've got one in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, it's not the same from a visual standpoint. You're not going to be able to do that Space Needle, Eiffel Tower, arch that you could see. I would love to see something in White River State Park. There was actually an iconic structure proposed that ended up getting built in like Singapore because we rejected it in the original White River State Park. A lot of the legislators decided it was I forget some of you may remember, but it was a famous architect, Cesar Pelli. And yeah, he proposed something that others said looked too much like a corn cob. And he basically ended up building them in like Malaysia. And so we missed out on that. There could have been, who knows, it's I don't know what that looks like. Like one of the things that I saw as a concept on the drawing board that some people in Sacramento, which is a city, I having worked in Sacramento and San Francisco, I sometimes tell people that Indianapolis is like if San Francisco and Sacramento had a baby, it would be Indianapolis. We have a lot of the San Francisco big city stuff, professional sports teams, huge convention center, art museums, things of that nature. But the livability and the friendliness of the Sacramento is far better than San Francisco. We're really a great mashup of those two kinds of cities. So what is it? San Francisco's got, iconic structures up the wazoo. Sacramento does not, and they had a conceptual thing while I was there, and one of them was a vertical park. It looked like the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but there were multiple levels of parks in a building. And I was like, that'd be pretty darn cool. Let's take that in White River State Park. A park in a park. But just something that makes you go, wow. A perfect example of this is there's something called Gardens by the Bay in Singapore. So Gardens by the Bay only came into existence like in 2012 or 11, something like that, like 10 years ago. And Singapore went from being down here on the leisure side to like, Dubai is another good example, right? Now these guys had money coming out everywhere in Dubai and Singapore. So a lot of this stuff is highly funded. But they did an iconic structure called Gardens by the Bay. It's got, you just Google it after you come here, Gardens by the Bay, and check it out. And you'll see that it's now the most visited attraction in Asia. So, Gardens by the Bay.
You mentioned your wish list for conventions like that. What about an actual political?
We have gotten requests by both the RNC and DNC every year. They're actually terrible pieces of business, in my opinion. The RFPs require, Laura will appreciate this, space holes of like 12 weeks. For some of the space, and all the space a minimum of 6 weeks. If we had to do that, we would have to bump Gen Con out of their dates for a year. We'd have to bump, potentially FDIC depending on how early or how late. It just, when we showed, the governor always asked for the RNC and the mayor always asked for the DNC, and we basically given them our analysis to say they both suck. Yeah, that's my sophisticated opinion on it. And then you also piss off half the country. Half the country is upset that you got that convention. Either one.
One more question. Last question.
Yeah.
In all your room nights and calculations, do you factor in the Airbnbs, VRBOs, all of that into those numbers as well?
We are only really doing that now because up until a year or two ago, they didn't have to pay a lodging tax. So we didn't want them there actually because they were not contributing to a revenue stream that helped the capital improvement board, and they were helping other things because the visitors would then spend money in restaurants and things of that nature. But they now pay lodging tax, so we actually now get market intelligence data on how many different units in Marion County or central Indiana are participating, what their numbers are like. So there are now reports that we can get a sense of that. One of the things we just saw that we just met with somebody on this a month ago, and during the pandemic, much like the hotel situation, the suburban properties did way better than the downtown properties. Everybody was afraid to go downtown. Civil unrest, empty, et cetera, and so, but now all those numbers are starting to come back downtown too. Yeah, thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you. All right, Leonard, thanks again. We are making a small donation in your name to 913 Sports. They serve 50,000 kids annually in Indiana area schools, Indy area, sorry. Innovative youth cycling program that promotes fitness and builds self-esteem. Leonard had actually bid on private dinner. Lamita and I did about 9 years ago for Tangrams. We had to do one of these 5-course tasting in his beautiful apartment on Mass Ave, so it's good to see you again. Please join us next week. You get to meet Butler Blue. Netflix having a dog documentary, so Graham lined up his favorite canine to come in, and again September 30th for past presidents. Thanks again, everybody. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah.